relax, talk to you guys about the psyche. So it was very interesting. We spoke about labels. We spoke about how labels is a condensation of information. And because our brains are finite and information is infinite, that discrepancy causes differences between definitions of the same label. So someone will say he is autistic, someone will say he's not autistic, because in their mind what it means to be autistic is different. And so he asked me, are labels good or are they not good? And I said to him, well, they're a tool, so they can be good or bad depending on how they're used. Lovely to see Boss Briggs and Platinum Mimi, my 2 top Patreon guests. Without you, I would have to work even more. I listened to Psalm 91 in Hebrew, and it was done by either an Arab or an Arab Jew, because it was pronounced the way it was pronounced, it was obviously pronounced like ancient Hebrew. You can tell immediately. Whereas modern Hebrew, the accent is very, very Europeanized, and that was done deliberately in the 40s or sometime around there, which is fine. Obviously, there's nothing wrong with that at all. It's just very interesting, the difference. So when the guy spoke Hebrew, it sounded exactly like Syriac or Arabic. It was amazing to hear the difference. I actually loved it more because it's so rich, so powerful. It's a lot more guttural. That's the difference. For example, computer, and with modern Hebrew pronunciation is mahshev, whereas in ancient Hebrew it's mahsev. Right, so you can tell it sounds much more Arabic, that similar, because all the Semitic languages had those pronunciations in it, right? So you can see it all the time, and the way they pronounce, like alim or miftah, it's pretty cool. So I'm going to learn that. Probably, I'm driving buses tonight for 6 hours, so I'm probably going to listen to Psalm 91 in Hebrew over and over. So by the time I finish my shift, I'll probably know all of the Psalm in Hebrew. So that's good. That'll get that out of the way, and then I've got to listen to the Greek Our Father, and that is I only know the first word, which is pater, and pater, lots of ak, yeah. So pater in Hebrew is father, and you can tell that's Indo-European because pater, fader, father, they're all the same word. In Germanic, in Greek, in Italian, padre, it's all the same word. They're just variations. So they all come from an original Proto-Indo-European language. Same as most Indian languages and Iranian, Persian, Afghani, all of those all originated from one original Indo-European language. As opposed to Semitic, they are different, and so are Sinto-Tibetic and Yaponic. Mate, when you put your indicator on, you've actually got to follow through with it, my friend. I don't blame them. Obviously, they're learning good on it. It just annoys me. We are trying social experimentation, so I'm going to go meet someone today, and just as a friend. But I don't think I can handle this social stuff too much. It's way too annoying. You've got to spend an hour to drive somewhere. Driver training, yeah. And then I got to go sit, have a coffee with them. How was your day? How's this? Oh, wow, that's lovely. That's amazing. Fantastic. And, I do all that stuff. And I don't dislike people at all. Don't get me wrong. I enjoy people. But I know that for them to realize that I do enjoy their company, I have to play this game. So the Sumerians weren't Semitic. They were a language isolate. And they ended up mixing with the Akkadians, who were Semitic, so much so that they actually adopted the Akkadian language. And so their language became extinct. But just like Hungarian, which is called Magyar, so Magyar and Basque and Sumerian, they're all language isolates, which means that they sort of arose on their own, not from anywhere else. So they're unique languages, developed amongst its own community. And the Sumerians invented the concept of writing. So they were probably, I would say that they were probably like a haplogroup J1. And the J1s originate from the Arabian and Yemeni Peninsula. Whereas the J2s, but there are other types of J1s. So there is a J1, the J2s came from the Caucasus Mountains, and that's me. So I guess I'm technically Caucasian, if that makes any sense. A lot of my genetic markers are in Scotland. A lot of the famous ones are in England as well, actually. But they're not that many. So in order of where my genetic marker exists, predominantly it exists in Chechnya, which is next to Russia. So Chechnya and Ingushetia, followed by Greece and Croatia, Macedonia, followed by Israel, followed by Lebanon last. Liran, speaking of Israel, Liran shows up. The ancient Hebrews come from the mountains too. The ancient Hebrews, 1 in 4 have the same genetic marker as me, which is the J2B. J2A is more Canaanite, and a lot of Hebrews are obviously derivatives of Canaanite genetically, we've now discovered, even though in the Bible they thought they were different to the Canaanites. They were not. And so the Noah, the 3 sons of Noah thing was incorrect. The Shem, Ham, and Japheth, they said that the Canaanites were descendants of Ham and the Europeans of Japheth. But actually, no. Hebrews and Canaanites both were descended from the same and the original Semitic peoples. The Hebrews archaeologically were in the mountains and descended at some point somewhere around 1 to 2000 BC. I would consider the Bible written by people who had a certain belief structure. So take it for that. And it's probably good in teaching us how not to act and how to act. So in that perspective, I would say there's a lot of truth to it. But to take it as archaeological, I would say no. Yeah, I would say that, to put it nicely, it wasn't designed to be a history book. Yeah, it's a combination of history and myth, yeah. I'd say that. But if you look at it as how we ought to behave and how we ought not to behave, then that way it's much easier to digest, I would submit. But there are some people that take it literally, even though that's their business to do that, I guess. That's the nice way of saying it. It's an example of how to and how not to. So it's people who tried to figure out how to behave, and they did a lot of things incorrectly. Yeah, it was basically our first attempt at trying to understand the world around us, and clearly it was by definition going to be the worst attempt. That's completely natural, right? I mean, our ancestors weren't privy to the information we have today, and they say God created man in His image. Well, now man is creating artificial intelligence, which is a mechanical version, which is even better. So I don't know what that tells you about God, but it's multi-dimensional. I don't like to say it's bullshit or it's not bullshit. Clearly it's not complete. I mean, Bible doesn't talk about germ theory. It doesn't talk about political structures. Well, not all of them. It doesn't talk about... Anyway. We're back. No, we're back. Are we back? 1, 2, 3, 4, back. Okay. So as I said, it doesn't talk about... As I was saying, it doesn't talk about Homo erectus. It doesn't talk about Homo floresiensis. It doesn't talk about Neanderthals. It doesn't talk about Australopithecus. It doesn't talk about the Australian Aborigines, the Native Americans. It doesn't really talk about much outside of a certain sphere. It doesn't talk about germ theory. It doesn't talk about the evolution of viruses. It doesn't talk about, modern medicine. There's so much that it doesn't talk about. So, but that is not a reason to then say it's complete bullshit. That's from my perspective. So there's a lot of information in there of our past humans who are really desperately trying to understand what's going on. And that in itself is something I would never dismiss. It's sort of like learning stories from your grandfather. And they didn't know what we know, but that is not a reason to discard everything they learnt. Yeah, that's my thing with the Bible. I take it as that. And so, was a step forward or back? Yeah, I would say it's a step sideways. Very interesting, but that's interesting. That's interesting because you look at, for example, they converted to a faith, and then that faith fractionated, as all faiths do, because humans cannot be homogenous in their belief systems. They physically cannot. Biologically, they cannot be. It does not work that way. If God made man in His image, then God is schizophrenic. If that's one nice way to put it, right? So, for example, you look at the Siege of Vienna. Now, I was listening to the Second Siege of Vienna today in the 17th century, which happened on believe it or not, the eve of the siege was September 11th. I think it was 1683. I think from memory, but it's always September 11th, which is very interesting. Now, what's interesting is that a lot of Protestants, because by now Martin Luther was alive, or had been around, it was just after he died actually, and Europe had now fractionated once again between the Catholics and the Protestants, and it turns out that the Protestants preferred to deal with the Muslims, the Muslim Ottoman Empire, because the Ottoman Empire did not kill them like the Catholics did. They only charged them a tax. So they said, well, if we have to choose, we'd rather choose the Muslims because they're charging us a tax, whereas the Catholics are actually killing us because they think we're heretics. So, to answer your question, yeah, it's like if they did not adopt that religion, it would have been another one. And, when Diocletian, when he set up his tetrarchy back in the 200s in the 3rd century, with the Roman Empire, he was massacring Christians everywhere. He made it illegal to have Christianity at all, to practice it or whatever. So the Christians were unified because they were being persecuted. But it was after you take the lid off and there's no more persecution, that's when it turns into becoming the persecutors. There are a lot of... it's very interesting because after that it was the rise of the Russians. So, they formed this fake Greek state. The same as Israel, right? Like Israel was the same thing. It's exactly the same thing. Immediately, as soon as Muhammad allegedly died, the civil war broke out between the Sunnah and Shia, and like a family feud. That is the law of humanity. Yeah, so humanity, whenever you apply a doctrine onto a group of people, it always fractionates. It happened with Judaism. It happened with Marxism, with communism. It happened with Christianity multiple times, even after the Protestant revolt with Luther. Then that split up with the Arminians, and then the Calvinists, and then the Anabaptists, and then before that you had the Arians and the Gnostics, and then Nicaeans wiped them out. And then as soon as Muhammad allegedly died, then that split immediately into Sunnah and Shia. And then the Sunnah and Shia split. So from the Shia, then you had the Alawiyyin, the Sab'awiyya, Al-Ithna Ashura, the Duruz. And then on the Sunnah side, you have Al-Wahhabites, the Salafiyyin, you have Al-Ahmadiyyin. That's what happens. It's the same with language. We had Indo-European. Indo-European splits up into, Persian, into Latin, into Greek, into, God knows what, into Brahmic, It all splits up into those. And then after that, Latin turned into Vulgar Latin, and then that split up into French, into Old French, Anglo-Norman, Spanish, which was Catalan and Castilian and Malagan, Romanian, and they used to speak Dacian and Thracian, and it just, everything fractionates. And so I've come to realize that it's within humans that you cannot apply something rigid, because if it does not bend, it will break. And that is why the English language became so successful compared to French, because French was the world language. Because the French tried to enforce their language from the Académie de Française, which is the French Academy of Language. They lost the war of languages because their language was rigid and they had rules, where English was designed from the ground up. So the English never, and there's reasons which I won't get into for this, but basically the street language went up. With English, the street language rose upwards, not top down. So that was the difference, and because of that, it allowed English to mutate, and so therefore it spread like a virus. And that's why viruses are so successful, because they mutate. If a virus does not mutate, then it's not going to last very long, because our immune system will beat it. And that's exactly what happens with religion. If you assign a dogma and a structure, it will always fractionate, always, because humans, as part of our nature, as part of not just humans, but life itself, grows and evolves and mutates. And so the doctrine does not fit every single person. First of all, I'm going to define what ancestors is. I've got to go in 5 minutes, so we can talk again. But there's a difference between ancestors and genetic markers. So, for example, if you go back 20 generations, right, from today, so 20 generations, right, then you are made up of 1,048,576 people. So we see ourselves as going back as a lineage, but we know that the further you go back, the more diluted your ancestry is. So, like, it takes 2 parents to make you. It takes 4 grandparents to make you. It takes 8 great-grandparents to make you. It takes 16. So when you go back 20, it takes 1,048,576 people to make you. And so that's... But I have to really go, unfortunately. Thank you for letting me talk your ear off, as always. I love talking to you guys. It's always a pleasure, and I love your feedback. And I'll try getting onto Gab Life again soon and talk about my psychiatric meetings. Until next time, Gab Life. Don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, to live Gabulous.